Welcome back, baseball fans, to the 77, 78, 79, 80 Fall League Draft. We are going to be examining the token round. The draft is over, the 8-round draft is over, but that does not mean that the season is ready to go. 256 players were drafted and added into the 384 guys that were on the rosters of the 32 teams, but in certain cases players were improved and not added, so we don't completely have a full list of players. And we have this tinkering period that teams with their rosters can decide, after looking at the 20 guys on their team, that maybe they want to see who's available on the street and sign some guys off the street and get rid of the guys they have on their roster. It's what I call it's one of the fun parts of the draft, the token. It's the token part of the draft. And normally the players that you see added here are very inconsequential. But I want to start first by showing what happened in the Summer League last year, or before the Summer League last year, when one of the teams decided to make extensive changes to their roster just before their season started. And that team was, in the Summer League, it was the Orioles. And what they did was they tinkered with the players they had from the 1984 season. So I kind of want to look at what they did right before the draft. They have 20 guys on the roster, but right before, not the draft, but right before the season started, you can still sign guys. And then once the season starts, then the rosters are locked. Okay, so just before the season started, the Orioles swapped out 3 players from the 1984 season that were on the roster. And we're going to kind of go through these 3 guys. And there's going to be very surprising information here. So the first guy they got rid of was Marty Barrett, who in 1984 had a really fine year. Marty Barrett at 303 in 1984. He was a 3 at second base. He actually was playing for the Red Sox, but the Orioles signed him off of the Red Sox minor league roster. And it seemed like, oh yeah, you just hold on to a 303 hitting second baseman. The Orioles didn't. They replaced him with this guy, Bill Duran, who in 1984, let's look at the stats. 1984, Bill Duran at 261. And you're thinking, what the heck's going on? Well, this is what the Orioles did. Duran was a switch hitter. Marty Barrett was only a right-handed batter. Duran was a B stealer. Duran was a B hit runner, good base runner, and had a high on-base percentage. But the bigger problem wasn't really a problem whatsoever. The bigger reason was because the Orioles had this guy. We had merged 2 different eras of baseball, the 69, 70, 71, and 84. And when we merged these, we found out when the Orioles added Davey Johnson to play second base, they already had a right-handed hitting second baseman. And having both Davey Johnson and Marty Barrett on the same team didn't make any sense, because they could only play second base, they could only bat right-handed. So by moving away from Barrett and going with Duran, the Orioles gave themselves options of getting a left-handed batter in the game, a switch hitter in the game, a guy with some speed in the game, and a hit and running ability in the game. And the Orioles liked switch hitters. So that was the reason they did it. They took the chance. Duran is definitely the lesser player, probably has lesser value than Barrett. But based on fit, how they fit for the Orioles, he was a better fit for the Orioles. The next guy from that same year of 84, the Orioles had Jerry Willard. Now in 84, he had 224. He had 10 home runs and 275 plate appearances. He had power both ways. But the problem was the Orioles had another catcher, Rick Dempsey, who normally had a great throwing arm, but in 1984 he did not. He only had a 0 throwing arm. And Jerry Willard was a liability throwing, and he had a low on-base percentage and OPS. So they signed this guy, Butch Whitaker. Now Whitaker prior to 1984 had some pretty good years of on base for the Yankees. 399 and 360. Excuse me. 399 and 413, I should say. But in 1984, he still had a 360 on base percentage. And as a switch hitter, he offered the same sort of flexibility to work in a platoon with Rick Dempsey. So the Orioles added Duran and Whitaker, 2 switch hitters, to bat 8th and 9th on their team. The third guy they got rid of was this guy, Wayne Gross, who would play for the Orioles in the year of 84 and 85. Now in 84, he only hit .216, but he hit 22 home runs. Now you're thinking, well, that's a nice left-handed stick who could at least hit home runs, would be nice to have. But they didn't even want his left-handed bat. They replaced him with this guy. Excuse me, Bob Horner. Now Horner, as a right-handed batter, had a really curious 1984. If you look at his season, and you can look at his splits right here, Bob Horner's 1984 splits, he was, against lefties, he was a liability. He did not even hit a home run in the plate appearances he had. He had 185. But he hit 302, 361, 488, 849 OPS versus righties. And as a righty who hit right-handed pitching, added to this roster, he would be the 3rd best right-handed hitter on the team. So they already had Brooks Robinson as a slick-fielding third baseman, of course, Brooksy. But Horner was very flexible to fill in at third base or designated hitter. So the Orioles added 3 very questionable players and cut 3 very questionable players. Right before the season started, the Orioles, they went on to win the World Series. Both Bill Duran and Butch Whitaker, I know it's crazy to say this, but they both had 5-hit games in the American League Divisional and Championship Series rounds. And, you know, as far as getting a 5-hit game out of a player in Strat, yeah, you can get kooky players, surprising players getting 5-hit games. So you could say that was just luck or coincidence or whatever you want to say, fate. But in any event, the Orioles went on to win the World Series, and having Duran batting 8th, Whitaker batting 9th, Bob Horner batting 6th, it really helped them win the World Series. And those guys were token players that were added at the end of the draft. So now it's time to get back and consider the token round. When we look at the token round, we can, let's see, look at the draft order. And the tokens are in the same order that the draft order was in. As you recall, the Cubs had the first pick in the draft, and the World Championship Red Sox had 32nd pick in the draft. And each team starts with 5 tokens. So that means you have 5 times 32 is 160. And after these tokens are used before the draft, during the draft, and with pluses and minuses you see here, we still have the 160. But we have all the token numbers here. And you see the Cubs actually had 7, Florida 7, Seattle 7, and the Mets had 7. So those would be the first teams that had a chance to use this token round and swap out and find guys on the street. So now let's examine and see what happened in the token round of the draft. Well, the first shocking thing was, and this is a really good thing, with the first pick in the draft, if you pass, then you pass for good, you've locked your roster up. The Cubs pass. They had acquired these extra tokens, and they said, you know what? We knocked the draft out of the park. We don't need to do anything. And when you look at their draft, the Cubs, they had a fantastic draft. They added Dave Kingman's 79 card with 48 home runs. They added Bill Buckner's batting title card 1980. They kept Bill Madlock, and they moved him to second base, where he played for the Giants just for 1 year in 78. Bobby Mercer comes to the Cubs. Ray Fosse comes back. He still hits almost 300. Buck Martinez, strong arm catcher, kills lefties. Jose Cardenal hits 340 against lefties. This one guy, Dave McKay, is the weakest pick of the 8 guys the Cubs got, because there was not a better third baseman available coming out of the 1978 set, and there was nobody better on the street. This is where they looked. They looked to replace Dave McKay, a guy they drafted, figuring that maybe they made a mistake, but they didn't. And McKay, what they got with him is a 2 at third base, a switch hitter. He had 537 plate appearances, so he did play a full season. And frankly, he'll be the weakest player on the team, but they passed. They did not find anybody better than Dave McKay to play third available in the 1978 card set. So after passing then, we go to Florida. And what Florida decided to do was, if you look at this light green color, this is an improvement. So what Florida decided to do with their first token was to move Juan Beniquez's 78 card back to 1977. One of the reasons why Florida did this was to create space so they can add another 1978 guy that they had their eyes on, and Beniquez was pretty much the same in 77 and 78. So this was part one of a multi-part plan for Florida to improve their team. All right, next up, Seattle. They needed to get corner outfield depth and defense, and this Gil Flores, at least in 77 for 1 year, is pretty good. It's 278. He's a base stealer, and he's a 3 in the corner outfield, which is better than anything they had. All right, so the Mets used their first token, and the Mets are kind of going all in on improving their offense at every position. And this card is a pretty good one. This is Larvel Blanc's 77 card. He hits 286. Most of this is against right-handed pitching, where his split is he's about a 300 hitter against righties. And they also have Ray Knight, believe it or not, who can play shortstop about as well as he can play third base and second base in 1977 as a nice platoon, and can play multiple positions. So the days of having Chuck Scrivener as the Mets shortstop are now over. So those were the 4 teams that had the 7 tokens. So after that, then we go to the teams with 6 tokens. And we start again, of course, with the Cubs. They passed, so they pass again. And then Toronto was one of the teams with 6 tokens. And they decided to add Rick Cerrone. They needed a catcher. And they added the 77 Rick Cerrone, who played catcher for the Blue Jays. And the reason this is such a great move is that they'll have his bad year. He hits 200, my goodness. But once this card is done with after this season, they can bump it up to his 1980 card, where he's got a -4 arm and hits like 280. His best and only year, really, Rick Cerrone. So the Blue Jays, and he did that for the Yankees, as Cerrone replaced Thurman Munson in New York. Toronto is going to hold on to Cerrone and bump him up to that -4 card. And that's why they made this move here 1 year early. All right, Florida, again up. They created space for a 78 player, and they found out that the best 1978 player, they needed a catcher against lefties, and they got Bo Diaz. This batting average doesn't look very good, 236, but his split is very good. He's very good against left-handed pitching. They've got a left-handed hitting catcher against right-handed pitching. So he was the best available catcher in either 77 or 78. So they made these 2 moves with Beniquez and Diaz to make that happen. All right, so now we have Seattle again using their 6 token, and they're kind of fishing around just like Florida is. They moved Bucky Dent from his 77 card to his 78 card because apparently Seattle has their eyes on somebody else from the 77 year. So they bumped Bucky Dent up. 77 and 78 Bucky Dent is about the same, not much difference. The next team, Colorado Rockies, what they did was they improved Joe Ferguson from his 77 card to a 79 card. And what you get with a 79 card is a really outstanding year, an 845 OPS, and he can hit lefties and righties about the same. So that makes him a full-time catcher. And anytime you have a chance to make a platoon player a full-time player, that's very good, because you need to have 6 full-time players and 3 platoons on your team as you're trying to assemble 12 hitters and 8 pitchers. Remember, these are 20-man rosters. So, I mean, a lot of these names you're seeing here aren't particularly interesting, but it's about fit. You're trying to play a baseball season with 20 guys instead of 25 guys. So that means you have a 3-man bench, you've got a 4-man bullpen, you need to have enough left-handed or right-handed pitchers, you need to have enough coverage defensively in case a guy gets injured, has to leave a game. You need to have like a couple catchers, you need to have a guy who can play second, third, and short, you need to have a 4th outfielder, all that sort of thing. So a lot of these aren't going to be flashy, but it's about fit, as I said earlier, with the Orioles. And what they did as getting fit players with Whitaker and Duran and Horner. All right, so now we're getting near the end of the 6 token, guys. Here's a great use of a token, is that the White Sox needed to simply add a guy. They only had 19, and they needed a 1979 guy, and this is a great pick. Jim Morrison, 79 card. 275, 833 OPS. If you've seen this card, he has homers on 28, 29, 210, and 37 against lefties. He really, as a second baseman, probably the most powerful second baseman in Strat for that year. That's a great pick for the White Sox. So next up we have Houston. They needed to find a third baseman against left-handed pitching, and Juan Bernhardt was available, as he was cut from the Florida Marlins, as his 77 card used to be a Florida Marlin, and that card was cut when Florida decided to make Juan Benitez a 77 card. So with that card available, the Astros said, well, Bernard's the guy we needed. We were looking for a third baseman against lefties, and there wasn't any around until Bernhardt got cut. All right, Cleveland next. And they're not happy with what's available for catchers against left-handed pitching, and they settle for Terry Humphrey. Interestingly, I don't think they're going to settle very long for Terry Humphrey, as they might just hold him and wait and see if any other left-handed catchers become available when teams add players and release players. All right, the last pick of the +6 tokens is Oakland, and the red color means this is a guy who was considered to be retired, and it's Wilbur Wood. And yes, the Oakland A's called up Wilbur Wood and said, hey Wilbur, can you come out of retirement? We need you, buddy. So Wilbur Wood, with his 10-10 record, a 5.20 ERA, and 168 innings. If you remember last year, the Oakland A's had Mike Cuellar on their team past his prime, so the A's like these old lefty reclamation projects to help give some education to the new young pitchers pitching for Oakland, like Rick Langford, Matt Keogh, Steve McCaddy, guys like that. So the grizzled Wilbur Wood comes to Oakland. All right, now we get to the 5 tokens. So this is where your bulk of your tokens are throughout the league. Chicago, Toronto, and Florida have now passed. Seattle's still making moves. They made a move for Flores and Dent, and now they needed to get Darrell Chaney this is probably his best year, at least as a switch hitter. Again, not much to talk about, but they had 2 right-handed shortstops. They had Kiko Garcia and Bucky Dent. Now they have a switch hitter, Darrell Chaney. So at least Seattle has an option between left-handed and right-handed at that shortstop position, depending. So that's good for a very weak team. Portland needed a corner outfielder against lefties with defense, and that's what Mickey Stanley was. And interestingly, Detroit needed the same thing. And Detroit was hoping they could bring their guy Mickey Stanley back, but Portland nabbed him. So Stanley has a good stick against lefties, even though he hits 265, and great defense. All right, the Twins said, "Oh, Seattle, you cut Kiko Garcia? We need a middle infielder." And they have Roy Smalley playing short. They have Bobby Randall at second and Castino at third. But Kiko Garcia becomes the flex, a middle infielder, the fourth infielder for the Twins. Milwaukee needed a corner outfielder against lefties, and Hector Cruz is a 3 with a -1 arm and hits lefties better than righties. Not much of a glamour pick there either. All right, Colorado needed a left-handed hitting catcher because they had very few left-handed hitters on the team, and catcher seemed to be the position, catcher or DH, and Ron Hodges is the guy. It's $265. Next one is the Ohio players needed another catcher. They have Gary Alexander. They needed to add another one. They added Earl Williams. Not a big deal. Like, some of these guys are going to be pretty awful that you're going to see here. The Orioles, they needed a roster spot in the middle infield. They had Mark Belanger as their Gold Glove shortstop. He bats right-handed. So they simply signed Jim Mason, basically because he bats left-handed. He doesn't hit very well, but at least he bats left-handed. So it gives them an option against righties who are really tough on righties and really bad against lefties. So Jim Mason, congratulations, you got into the Carryover League because you bat left-handed. All right, Texas, interestingly, they really were looking for a corner outfielder who could play both ways, and Paul Dade became available, and he's got a great set of numbers here. 291. He could play left field, right field, hits lefties and righties both well, can play third base. The Rangers at one point had Mike Jorgensen in the outfield, and Jorgensen's actually better at first base. So getting Paul Dade to replace Jorgensen in the outfield is a win for the Rangers. All right, next up, Arizona. The Arizona needed to sign a guy who went on the rotation, because they needed to find a guy who pitched 200 innings. Fernando Arroyo pitched 209 innings, and his ERA is 4.17, which is the lowest ERA of all the scrubs out there who still pitched 200 innings. So they signed Fernando Arroyo. All right, here's a cool move by a perennial World Series team. Cincinnati needed a designated hitter, and they got a pretty good one here from the Padres. Jerry Turner, 280, 784 OPS, but he's a lefty who can hit lefties pretty well and righties. And as far as DH go, it's an improvement on what they had prior to that. The Reds had Milt May, Bob Beal, Ted Martinez, a bunch of scrubs as a designated hitter. And so Turner is definitely a guy you could have him bat 5th or 6th in that lineup. All right, and then the Red Sox passed. And of course, you know, the Red Sox are the 32nd team. So now we're down to the teams with 4. And all the teams that are passed, they can't pick anybody. So you're going to see more passes now. The Expos needed a catcher. They went and found George Mitterwald, who at 238. He's got power against lefties. All right, here's Detroit. And this is a really bad pick. Detroit really wanted Mickey Stanley back for his glove, because they had a 4 in right field, Tim Corcoran, and they needed an outfielder against lefties who could play defense, and they found nothing out there. Nobody could catch the ball and hit left-handed pitching from 1978 who was still on the street. So this was kind of a really bad move for the Tigers. They took Bob Bailey for his stick. He's got a nice split, even though he hit 191. His split against lefties isn't that bad. He has power and walks, but he can't field. He's also a 4, but that's all you could get. That's why you want to acquire tokens so you don't get stuck adding Bob Bailey to your team. All right, getting down to the 3 tokens, and now you're going to see a lot of the passes, and we're going to get to the teams that you haven't seen yet because they used all their tokens in the draft. And that first team is the Yankees. The Yankees were burning through tokens to get Jim Spencer, to get Reggie Jackson. So with their first token, the Yankees needed a catcher to back up Munson. They took Fred Kendall, but not for long, as they're hoping for something better than Fred Kendall to come along. But right now, Fred Kendall's the best they could find. And we keep going. We're down to the 3s, and now we're going to reset one more time down to the below 3s or the 2s. And everybody's passing now. The Yankees are still thinking, gee, we could still improve our team. All these teams are passing. Okay, until we get to the Phillies. So, the Phillies, the only team that has not made a move yet in the token round, they're sort of like the Orioles, where I started this video. They basically have 17 guys on their team that they like, and 3 scrubs. I can't remember who the 3 scrubs were. I believe it's a Wayne Cage. That second baseman that backed up Rob Wilfong. Hector Torres. I think it's Hector Torres. And another corner outfielder. In any event, what Philadelphia did was Mike Jorgensen, the Rangers cut Mike Jorgensen because they already had Mike Hargrove at first base. So Philadelphia said, you know what, we want Mike Jorgensen to play first base for us because he's a 1. He's a 1 at first base. He has some power. He has some walks. He only hit 246. But you know what? Last year, we had Wayne Cage play first base for us, and he was a 4 E18. So now they have Mike Jorgensen, who's a 1 E17. Then they decided that, you know what? We didn't like Hector Torres. Let's bump him up to Mike Tyson. Tyson doesn't give you much stick, but he's also a 2 at second base. And then, with one more roster spot to use, the Phillies said, you know what? Mike Jorgensen can't hit lefties. So let's use our last offensive spot on a first baseman who can hit lefties, and that's Doug Alt. So Jorgensen and Alt are going to be Phillies platoon, and Mike Tyson is going to be platooning with Rob Wilfong at second base. This for a Philadelphia team who is sort of the favorite to go to the World Series for the National League. So the mere fact that they've got 3 pretty lousy guys here with the 18th, 19th, and 20th spot on the roster means that they have a tremendous amount of confidence on guys like Mike Schmidt, Steve Carlton, Tug McGraw, Greg Luzinski, Babe McBride, guys like that. And so they can afford to have 3 kind of scrubby guys on their team. They're using the same model the Orioles used. All right, now, after them, as we're getting near the end of this thing, we got 4 left, you'll notice we get to a point here where it's 77. And so what happens is, as teams prepare for their opening day game, all the teams are looking at the 1977 box only, realizing it's the last time to look at the players in that box and see if they miss something, if there's actually a guy in the box that's better than somebody on their team, even in a position that's not a position of need. And so these 4 moves reflect that. The White Sox they had a 77, I believe it was Alan Bannister as their DH against lefties, but John Walkenfuss adds a lot more power as a DH against lefties, so they flipped those guys. Cleveland flipped a catcher versus lefties as well. They probably would have liked Walkenfuss, but Cleveland ended up with Fran Healy, who could hit lefties pretty good. Remember the Yankees, we talked about. They took, what was his name up here? Fred Kendall. And then they said, you know what? After looking at it a little closely, Fred Kendall hits righties better than lefties. Jerry Grody hits lefties better. He hits lefties better. So we'd rather have Grody catch against lefties because Thurman Munson actually hits righties better than lefties for the card he has in the league. So they added Jerry Grody. So Grody and Munson are both going to be in New York for the Yankees. And lastly, this guy was sitting out there as the top relief pitcher, the top pitcher who inexplicably was available with a 2.96 ERA and 69 appearances with a 1.22 whip. Bill Campbell, not very good against righties, but very good against lefties. And everybody seemed to have their bullpens all dialed in, so he was just sitting there, and the Yankees made a really cool move. What they did was they had Jim Beattie in their bullpen, and they said, you know what, let's put Beattie in the rotation, and let's get rid of Dave LeManchuk, who was it seemed like he went on the rotation in 77. It seemed like he was going to get better, but he never really does. Dave LeMancic doesn't really get good. He's got a good 79 card, and the Toronto Blue Jays can have him in a couple of years if they want. But the Yankees added Bill Campbell to their bullpen, put Jim Beattie into the 4 spot. So the Yankees now, they have Ron Guidry with a 1.74, 25-3, 78 season. They have Ed Figueroa, 20-game winner. They have Larry Sorensen with a 2.81 ERA, a 78 card, and Jim Beattie as the number 4 starter. They have Bill Campbell in the bullpen with Sparky Lyle and Dick Tidrow and Paul Lindblad. That's the Yankee pitching staff. So the Yankees were like, George Steinbrenner's on the phone, he's going to fire everybody because they're supposed to win the World Series. So the Yankees made these moves just because the Red Sox won the World Series last year and the Orioles aren't going away. So I like the fact that at the very end of the token round, you see teams with World Series aspirations, the Phillies, the Yankees. They're making moves because they don't want to be caught flat-footed when the season starts played out. And after, you start playing these games and you can't make the substitutions you want, and you're looking at the bench for a pinch hitter and there's nobody there, and you're looking in the bullpen to bring in somebody to get somebody out and there's nobody there, and you go, my gosh, this team stinks. So the fact that the World Series candidates, Phillies and Yankees, are making moves is pretty cool as far as, dialing in the final roster spots. So with that, that's going to conclude the token round. As once you do this, I can now say that this is the actual 20-man rosters for all the teams. Starting with Arizona here, 20 players of each team, and 20 times 32 teams is 640 guys. And so everybody's got 20 guys, and they're ready to get the season started. So with that, we'll call it, this has been an examination of the token portion of the draft, the last thing you do before you start the season. And the 77 season is ready to kick off, and that'll kick off in the fall of 2021. And when we resume, we'll start getting ready for the Summer League. There'll be a little Summer League tournament with some of the 69 players. The draft for the Summer League is in the middle of March, and the Summer League actually will start in the middle of March around St. Patrick's Day. And those games will be the first games that I'll upload for the 2021 season. Thank you for watching these videos. I appreciate your comments, and we'll see you next time.